Have you ever felt that your life is always in someone else's hands? Your boss decides the tone of your day with a single word. Your phone decides where your attention goes. An algorithm decides what you should want, believe, consume. And at the end of it all, a silent question lingers. Do I really have any control over what happens to me? This feeling of powerlessness is common. It's as if the outside world carries more weight than any choice you can make. You end up sitting in the passenger seat of your own life, watching events unfold without being able to hold the wheel. But here is what few people ever reveal. There is an ancient, almost forgotten law that explains exactly why everything seems to slip through your fingers and how you can reclaim that power. It is called the law of mentalism, and perhaps this is the first time you'll hear it this clearly. The mind is not just a container of thoughts. It is the matrix that shapes your entire reality. In the next minutes, we will cross this threshold together. Imagine this. You are driving through an unfamiliar city. You turn on the GPS, trusting it to show the way. But suddenly the signal drops. The map freezes. You keep moving, but with no real sense of direction. You circle around, take wrong turns, end up in dead ends. For most people, life feels exactly like this. An internal GPS that has lost its signal. You keep moving, but the road feels random, the destination unclear, the sense of control gone. And while the navigator is broken, traffic feels heavier, the streets more confusing, the signs misleading. Now picture the moment the GPS reconnects. The path suddenly appears clear on the screen. The city didn't change. Your point of orientation did. What once felt chaotic now reveals an order. Each curve makes sense. Each road leads somewhere. This is how the mind works. When disconnected, it generates chaos, repetition, and the sense of being lost. When aligned, it reveals that reality is not random. It is a reflection of what you already carry inside. Here lies the forgotten principle. The law of mentalism states, the all is mind, the universe is mental. Everything you experience, from a conversation with a coworker to the silence of a sleepless night, from the smallest atom to the vast galaxies, exists within and is projected by the mind. But here's the paradox. When you don't understand this law, your mind keeps projecting anyway, only without direction. It's like driving with an outdated GPS. You always arrive somewhere, but rarely where you truly wanted to go. Think about those days when you wake up with a thought like, this day is going to be terrible, and then traffic jams. Your colleague answers sharply. The message you were hoping for never arrives. By the end of the day, everything seems to prove your first thought right. But was it really bad luck? Or was it your inner GPS mapping routes before you even left the house? The promise of this journey is simple and direct. If the mind creates reality, as the Hermetic teachings reveal, then learning how to operate this inner GPS is the key to stop living as a passenger and start steering consciously. This is not about quick self-help tricks or forced positive thinking. This is about a universal law, recognized for centuries in Hermetic wisdom and echoed today even in modern science. The mind shapes matter, and if that is true, then the question becomes unavoidable. If the mind creates everything, why do we feel so little control over our lives? That's the paradox we'll unfold in the next block. If the law of mentalism is true, if reality is, at its root, mental, then you are already co-creating every single day. The paradox is this: most people are doing it unconsciously. They shape reality without knowing they are shaping it. It's like holding the wheel of a car without realizing your hands are on it. You drift, pulled by the slope of the road, by the winds, by every bump. You keep moving, but not because you chose the direction, because you let every external force decide for you. That's how unconscious co-creation works. Your thoughts and emotions are not neutral. Each one is a seed thrown into the field of reality. The problem is that most people throw these seeds without awareness, then wonder why they harvest weeds instead of fruit. Science itself has begun to point in this direction. Quantum physics tells us that the observer collapses the wave function, meaning that reality doesn't simply exist out there, fixed and finished. It responds to observation, to attention, to consciousness. In other words, the world you see is not merely seen. It is also shaped in the act of seeing. This echoes the Hermetic law spoken thousands of years ago. The all is mind, the universe is mental. What the sages described as a universal principle, modern science glimpses as the role of the observer in creating reality. And then there is another metaphor emerging in our times, the simulation hypothesis. Think of life as a vast coded system. like an advanced version of the Matrix. You are not simply playing inside the simulation, you are also feeding it with your own code. Every thought is a line of programming. Every belief is an algorithm that keeps running in the background. The question is not whether you are creating. You already are. The question is, are you writing your code consciously? Or is your GPS still out of signal, letting old programs loop forever? This is where the paradox deepens. On one hand, we are the authors of reality. On the other, we feel powerless, victims of chance. Both are true, but only at different levels of awareness. Imagine again the GPS metaphor. With the signal lost, you are still moving. You are still creating. You just don't know where you are headed, and so the movement feels like chaos. When the signal reconnects, the same streets you were already driving suddenly reveal a coherent path. Nothing outside changed. What changed was the alignment of your inner navigator. This is why so many people live with the nagging feeling that life is happening to them instead of through them. They are projecting constantly, but without realizing it, they end up trapped in cycles of repetition. Same arguments, same financial struggles, same inner doubts. And the more unconscious the process, the stronger the feeling of powerlessness. It's not that you have no control, it's that your control is scattered, hidden beneath layers of noise, beliefs, and unobserved thoughts. This is the paradox of mentalism. You are always co-creating, yet it feels like you are not, because the act of creation is hidden inside the very thoughts you rarely stop to notice. And so the question arises, if the mind is the code, the navigator, the hidden architect of reality, why do we still feel so powerless as if life were written elsewhere? That is the threshold we will cross in the next step. Let's bring this principle down to where you actually feel it, your everyday life. Think of the mornings when you wake up already carrying a weight. A single thought echoes, this day will be heavy. And soon enough, the traffic clogs, the barista gets your order wrong, an email arrives with bad news. By the evening, you say to yourself, I knew it. I felt it from the start. It looks like confirmation. It feels like fate. But in truth, it is the law of mentalism at work. That first thought was not just a mood. It was a direction set in your inner GPS, and your day followed. Or picture this, you send a message and wait for the reply. The silence grows. Minutes stretch into hours. Your mind starts weaving stories. They're ignoring me. I must have done something wrong. The reply eventually comes, casual, harmless. But by then, your body has already lived through hours of rejection, all created in the theater of your own thoughts. This is the invisible prison, not realizing how powerfully your inner code is writing the script of what you perceive as reality. And here is the trap that so many fall into. Believing the answer is just to think positive. This is not about repeating happy affirmations while ignoring your actual state. That is like covering a broken GPS with a smiley sticker. The map is still lost. The direction still unclear. The Hermetic teaching goes far deeper. It says, whether positive or negative, conscious or unconscious, your mind is always projecting. The point is not to paste positivity on top of fear. The point is to realize that every thought is already a line of code running in the system. Look at the cycles you know too well. You avoid an important task, telling yourself, I'll do it later. Days pass, and now the weight of procrastination feels like a mountain. You expect disappointment in relationships, and somehow, you find yourself again in the same argument, the same heartbreak, the same distance. You believe money is always scarce, and strangely, no matter how much comes in, it seems to slip through your fingers. From the outside, it feels like bad luck. From the inside, it feels like weakness. But through the Hermetic lens, it is simply unconscious co-creation. And this is why so many people feel the modern pain of powerlessness. Algorithms dictate what we consume. Social pressure shapes what we desire. The rush of constant comparison on social media whispers, you're already behind. It is a perfect storm of external signals, but none of them would have power if the inner GPS were aligned. Because once you remember that the map begins inside, the noise outside loses its grip. Let's be honest, the unconscious mind doesn't stop creating just because you ignore it. It is always active, like a background app draining your battery. That is why the Hermetic path does not tell you to simply replace negative with positive. It asks you to become aware, to sit in the driver's seat of your own navigation system. Because here is the most confronting truth. The world you experience is not unfair. It is precise. It reflects not what you wish, but what you are running within. And if that sounds overwhelming, it is also the seed of liberation. Because if you created the loops unconsciously, you can begin to create with awareness. But this raises the next question. If the law of mentalism is always at work, how do you move from being unconsciously driven by it to consciously steering it? That's where the revelation comes. Up to now, we've walked through the paradox. You are already creating, yet it feels as if you have no control. But here lies the hinge moment, the revelation that can shift the way you see yourself forever. The law of mentalism is not a metaphor, not an abstract idea. It is the root principle of Hermetic philosophy. The all is mind, the universe is mental. What does this mean in living terms? It means that the universe is not a stage where random events play out. It is more like a field, responsive and alive, in which consciousness writes patterns. And your mind, yes, the same mind that worries about bills, remembers a childhood song, feels the sting of a message left unread. That mind is the brush painting on the canvas of reality. Think about it. How many times has a single thought shifted your entire body? You remember a mistake and suddenly your chest tightens. You imagine a joyful reunion and your eyes soften, your breath expands. Nothing outside changed, but everything inside did. This is not imagination for fun. This is the direct evidence that thought is not trapped in the head. It ripples into the body, and from there, into the field of reality. Let's make it even simpler. Pause right now for just 2 minutes. Choose one thought. Perhaps the phrase, "I am safe" or "I am lost." Whisper it internally. Repeat it slowly. Notice what happens in your breathing. Notice the muscles of your face. Notice the way the room feels around you. Did you catch it? A sentence inside you changed your experience of the outside. That is mentalism, not in theory, but in operation. And here is the forgotten truth. Your mind is already doing this all the time. Thoughts come like uninvited guests, and before you even notice, they have reorganized your physiology, your mood, and eventually the events you call reality. This is why the sages spoke of purification of the mind, not as moral discipline, but as practical necessity. If you let the inner GPS run on noise, it will keep calculating routes you never intended. Science again whispers the same secret. Neuroscience shows that repeated thoughts carve grooves in the brain, shaping perception itself. Quantum theory suggests that observation is not passive. It participates in the unfolding of what is observed. Hermetic wisdom ties the threads. The mind is not a mirror reflecting the world. It is the generator projecting it. So the real question is not, does the mind create reality? The real question is, how conscious are you of what your mind is creating right now? Let's return to the GPS image. When the signal is broken, you still move, but in circles. When the signal reconnects, the very same streets become meaningful paths. In the same way, your mind is always transmitting, unconscious. It repeats loops of anxiety, scarcity, rejection. Conscious, it begins to align with clarity, direction, creation. This is the forgotten principle. You are not merely a passenger. You are not condemned to accident or fate. You are the one holding the signal. And once you realize this, the first shift is not to force the world to obey you, but to recognize that the world has already been obeying your mind all along. So here is the invitation. Today, notice one phrase that repeats inside you. Watch how it shapes your mood, your interactions, your choices. Do not judge it. Do not try to replace it immediately. Just notice, because the moment you see the code, you are no longer ruled by it. That is the beginning of conscious creation. And yet this brings us to the practical challenge. If the mind is always coding reality, how do you begin to clean the noise, to reprogram the navigator, to move from chaos to clarity? That is the next step we will explore. Revelation is powerful, but it only becomes transformation when it steps into daily life. Knowing that the mind creates reality is not enough. The work begins in reprogramming the signal. Think again of the GPS. If it is clogged with old data, bad coordinates, or endless rerouting, no matter how carefully you drive, the journey feels confusing. The first task then is not to add more noise, but to clear the system, to purify. Start small. Notice the thoughts that repeat most often. Not the loud occasional ones, but the quiet background phrases that run like a soundtrack beneath your day. I'm always late. No one listens to me. I don't have enough. Something is wrong with me. These are not just words. They are instructions. Each one is a line of code running silently in the background, adjusting the way your body moves, the way you interpret events, and the way the world seems to respond. So here is the practice. Take a notebook, or even your phone, and write them down. Not once, not twice, but every time they return. Within days, you'll notice patterns. The same phrases, looping endlessly, like a playlist on repeat. And here is the key. Reality often mirrors these loops. If you carry the phrase "I am ignored," you will notice every pause in a conversation as proof. If you carry the phrase "money slips away," each bill seems heavier, each expense a confirmation. The loop inside becomes the pattern outside. This is not punishment. It is precision. The law of mentalism ensures that the signal you broadcast returns in form, and the liberation begins not with force, but with awareness. Because once you see the program, you can choose whether to keep running it. Now, purification is not glamorous. It is not about grand rituals. It is about cleaning the static. Turn off the constant scroll of your phone for 10 minutes, and notice how the silence feels. Pause after a stressful meeting and ask, what thought am I carrying right now? And how is it shaping the way I see this room, this person, this day? Each pause is like recalibrating the GPS. You are not adding new maps. You are reconnecting to the signal that was always there. And slowly, the system begins to shift. The same street that once looked like a dead end now appears as a path. The same situation that once felt like rejection now looks like space. The same challenge that once felt like bad luck now shows itself as an echo of your own code. This is what it means to reprogram the GPS. Let's bring this into specific areas of life. Work. Notice the phrase you repeat before tasks. Is it, "I can't handle this"? Try sitting with it, seeing it, then gently offering a new one. "I am learning to handle this." The shift is small, but the root recalculates. Relationships. Pay attention to the loops. Do you always expect distance, conflict, betrayal? Watch how your body tenses before words are even spoken. The loop has already written the scene. When you see it, you can pause before pressing play again. Money. Many live with the silent code. There is never enough. It shapes how they spend, how they save, even how they notice opportunities. Try writing down each time the phrase arises. Awareness begins to loosen its grip. The point is not to force positivity. The point is to become the navigator again, to stop letting broken coordinates define your reality. And this brings us back to the promise. You are not powerless. The feeling of being lost comes only from forgetting that the GPS is in your hands. If what you've heard so far resonates, then you are already tuning into a frequency most ignore. And if this resonance spoke to you, subscribe and enter the field, because the map only opens for those who are willing to follow it. Now, purification is the first step, but there is more. What happens when the signal reconnects? When the GPS doesn't just stop sending you in circles, but actually begins to draw a clear route? That is where the expansion unfolds. Up to this point, we've cleared the static, exposed the loops, and begun to see how unconscious thoughts write the reality we live. But what happens when the inner GPS finally reconnects? When the signal returns, the experience of life transforms. The same streets you've been driving all along are revealed to be part of a larger map. What once felt like confusion now makes sense. What once felt like randomness now shows direction. The city hasn't changed. The traffic hasn't disappeared. The only thing that shifted was the alignment of your navigator. This is what it feels like when the mind begins to align with the law of mentalism consciously. Chaos turns into pattern. You begin to notice how events that seemed scattered are connected. Noise turns into signal. Your thoughts no longer pull you in 10 different directions. They begin to flow like a single current. Coincidence turns into correspondence. You start seeing the mirror effect, the inner and the outer moving in rhythm. This is not magic in the sense of bending the universe at will. It is magic in the original sense, the recognition that reality has always been mind-shaped, and now you are aware of how. Let's return once more to the GPS. Without signal, you circle, you doubt, you waste fuel and time. With signal, you see the route clearly. Even if the road is long, even if there are detours, you know where you are headed. This is the difference between living unconsciously and living aligned with the principle. Life does not suddenly become effortless, but it becomes coherent. You know why you are on this road and where it leads. And this is the moment where the seeker's journey begins to reveal itself. Because what the Hermetic path whispers is not simply that you can manifest what you want. It is that the real journey is remembering who you are. The law of mentalism does not just give you tools to get more control. It gives you back the map of your own essence. When you realize that thoughts of scarcity shape scarcity, you also realize you can choose abundance as a frequency. When you see that loops of rejection summon rejection, you also see you can invite belonging as a state. When you notice fear constructing obstacles, you also notice trust building bridges. Every route begins within, and so the seeker understands. Life is not about avoiding traffic, avoiding challenges, avoiding pain. These will still appear, just like the inevitable detours on any map. But with the GPS aligned, every detour has meaning. Every delay has a place in the larger journey. This is where faith and clarity meet. Not blind faith that everything will work out, but deep clarity that the route itself is alive and responsive. Think of the difference this makes. In relationships, instead of feeling cursed by repetition, you begin to see each cycle as an echo of an inner code asking to be rewritten. In work, instead of being trapped by comparison, you see your own pace, your own map, unfolding with precision. In purpose, instead of drifting, you begin to notice the signs, conversations, opportunities, synchronicities, all lining up as if the road itself is guiding you. The GPS metaphor is simple, but it carries a profound truth. The world outside is not random chaos. It is navigation in action, and the clearer your inner signal, the clearer the outer road. This is why the Hermetic path is not about adding something you lack. It is about removing what clouds the signal, until you remember you were always connected. And here lies the expansion. When you shift from living as a passenger of chance to living as a navigator of mind, the journey no longer feels like a maze. It becomes a path. And so we arrive at the threshold of the final insight. If the GPS of the mind can set direction, then the real power lies not only in seeing the route, but in defining it. Because the question is no longer, am I creating reality unconsciously? The question becomes, what happens when I choose the route consciously, and reality aligns outside with the signal inside? That is where the closing revelation awaits. Let's return to where we began. The sense of life being decided by others, the boss shaping your mood, the phone hijacking your attention, the algorithm telling you what to want, and beneath it all the silent ache. Do I really have any control over what happens to me? The answer now is clear. Yes, but not in the way the world told you. Not through force, not through endless effort, not through trying to bend the outside into obedience. The key has always been inside, the law of mentalism. When you truly understand this principle, something irreversible happens. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of random chaos. You recognize that the so-called accidents of life are not accidents at all, but reflections of the thoughts you've been carrying, the codes you've been running. The day you wake up saying everything will go wrong, and it does, that is not unfairness. That is precision. The silent loop of I am ignored that keeps reappearing in conversations and relationships. That is not a curse. That is feedback. The weight of there is never enough echoing in your finances. That is not fate. That is the mind projecting scarcity until you notice it. And here lies the transformation. The moment you see that your mind is the GPS, you can begin to define the route. You can pause before the old thought takes over and ask, is this really the map I want to follow? You can clear the static, silence the noise, and feel the signal return. You can choose thoughts not as decoration, but as coordinates. And when you do, life itself begins to align. This is not theory, it is practice. When you consciously apply the law of mentalism, you notice relationships shifting because you stopped expecting rejection and began expecting presence. Work changing because you stopped carrying the code of inadequacy and began carrying the code of learning and growth. Finances transforming because you stopped repeating never enough and began defining a route of sufficiency, of flow, of expansion. Reality mirrors what you carry, and when you choose consciously, the mirror changes. This is why Hermetic wisdom is not a distant philosophy but a living key. To comprehend the law of mentalism deeply and to apply it consciously day by day is to step out of the fog of powerlessness and into the clarity of creation. And that clarity changes everything. It changes how you wake up in the morning. It changes how you interpret silence. It changes how you carry yourself into the world. It changes the very fabric of your reality. The mind is not just a container of thoughts. It is the navigator of existence. And whoever learns to define the route within sees the path align without. This is the essence of the transformation, from feeling lost and at the mercy of chance, to walking in clarity, knowing that each step is guided by a law as ancient as the stars and as intimate as your next breath. And yet we close with the question that opens the next code. If the mind creates everything, what happens when we go deeper, when we not only change the thoughts, but the very frequency that sustains them? That is the threshold we will cross in the next journey.